Well, good morning, Southern Oregon. Welcome back to the Real Estate Show. I'm Alice Lema. I'm a broker here in beautiful Southern Oregon with John L. Scott Real Estate, and I am your host here of the Real Estate Show. And today we have one of our favorite guests, Miss Tia Politi. She is the owner of the Rental Housing Support Services, LLC. She's also the current president of Oregon Housing Association and also the current president of the Lane County Renter Owners Association. She also runs 5 tenant hotlines, landlord tenant hotlines, just a wealth of information. She comes on the show every so often to bring us up to speed about what's going on in the topsy-turvy world of Oregon landlord tenancy. And whether you're a landlord, thinking of being a landlord, or a tenant, you want to listen to this because you want to have the hard facts. You want to know what the rules really are. And, it just doesn't hurt to run, especially if you're a landlord, to run your business like a business. And that's part of what Tia Politi teaches. And when she comes on the show, talks about what's going on and what's working and what's not. Lots and lots of great tips. Speaking of great tips, wanted to pass on a couple of interest rate possibilities because, the rates are up 5%. Some people paying a little more, some people paying a little less, but just wanted to give a shout out to some things that you can do to deal with all of this. Because boy, it happened fast and it happened hard, didn't it? We've got some folks out there trying to buy houses and their payments are now $300 a month more than they were even a couple of months ago. And I know it's been hard for everybody to adjust to this, and sellers are having some adjustment as well. Some of them are taking their houses off the market and renting them. Some of them are deciding to remodel and just stay put. And some of them are just getting on board with making it work in this kind of a market. So just real quick, consider what we used to do back in the 70s and 80s. We used to buy down the rate, talk to your lender about possibly giving them more money and having a lower interest rate forced down because of that. There's also some lenders out there that are doing this interesting program. I think they're calling a lock, shop, and go. But what they're doing is they're locking buyers in with an interest rate even before they have an address. Super cool. Not all lenders are doing it, but call your lender and find out. And if you're selling, please stay on the market. We still have a lot of buyer traffic out there. It's still a great time to move. And for those of us older folks, 5% was still a good deal, at least back in the day. So stay tuned. We've got a quick commercial break coming up, and then we're going to be talking to Tia Politi. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back to the Real Estate Show, everybody. I'm Alice Lema, broker John L. Scott here in beautiful Southern Oregon. And we're with Tia Politi, one of our favorite guests. She is what I lovingly call the walking, talking encyclopedia of all things landlord tenant. Welcome back, Tia.
Oh, that's very sweet, Alice. Thanks so much for having me. I always enjoy doing your show.
Well, and our listeners get so much out of all the great information you give us. For anybody who's new to landlord tenancy and maybe doesn't know you, can you take a quick minute and just tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Tia Politi, and I'm the president of the Oregon Rental Housing Association. And I'm also the president of the Rental Owners Association of Lane County. I own and operate Rental Housing Support Services, LLC. I provide helpline services to 5 different landlord associations around the state, including Portland, Multnomah County, Lane County, Linn-Benton County, Coos Bay, and Treasure Valley. I do evictions for hire, which may sound like a terrible thing to do, but it actually is quite productive. And I help landlords, I consult and help them through problems they're having with their tenants. I'm basically a tenant non-compliance specialist. So,
nice.
Really help landlords wrap their minds around, the requirements for preparation and service of legal notice. And then if the tenant doesn't cure, to be able to help them through the court process as well.
Mm-hmm. And in Oregon, it's quite a complicated thing to be a landlord anymore, isn't it?
Well, it certainly has gotten more complicated over the years. Yes, we're facing definitely an uphill battle, depending on how November elections come out. With a triple Democrat majority in Salem, if that continues for the long session in next year, we're in for it. I'm really telling people I'm not telling you who to vote for. I'm just telling you, if we don't change that triple majority, we are doomed as landlords to far more onerous changes than what you've experienced so far. So definitely want to see some balance back in our legislature. So folks have to work together to craft really responsible legislation that addresses concerns of both sides, not just one side of the problem.
Right, right. Fairness is everything. It really is. So let's go back in time a little bit when last time you were here a few months ago, and let's recap some of the changes that happened during the last episode we had, because there were some big ones, and not everybody is still aware of not only the changes, but how to properly execute those changes.
Really, it's confusing for landlords and tenants alike. We've had so many different overlays during the pandemic, 3 different executive orders, 2 House bills, 3 Senate bills. Right now, we're fingers crossed, we're heading down the slope to the end of the worst of it. We're still under the mandates of Senate Bill 891. So for housing providers who aren't aware, we're still obligated to serve a 10-day notice for non-payment of rent instead of a 72-hour notice or a 144-hour notice. That rule continues through September 30th of this year, beginning, unless something changes, don't hold me to it. As of today, this is what we're under. I mean, we've gotten really used to going, today, this is the law. We'll see what comes tomorrow, because it's changed so quickly and just been really, really tough. I mean, I'm even hearing of some tenants still trying to give their landlord a declaration of financial hardship, and that hasn't been applicable since last June 30th. But right now, we're still under the mandates of Senate Bill 891. The 10-day notice or 13-day notice is required to be served. And then if your renter provides you with written evidence that they have applied for rent assistance, they are protected. They're in this protected state called the safe harbor period. And what that means is basically, while that application is pending, you are not allowed to take any action against your renter for non-payment, except with one exception, which is damage to the premises. So that was something they parsed out for us from the last bill that Senate Bill 891 modified to continue, because OHCS assured us that they would be able to process these applications in 60 days. No problem. No problem. And Margaret Salazar, the director who promised that to the legislature, was rewarded for her failure by an appointment to the Biden administration. So that's what failure in government looks like. Fail here and we'll just
no bitterness on our part.
No, yeah, you can't hear the sarcasm in my tone, I'm sure.
Oh, well, we're all disappointed for sure.
That's right. Well, aside from that, not only could they not do it in 60 days, some counties extended it to 90 days, and even that wasn't enough time. We are still hearing stories about landlords whose tenants showed them written proof of application for rent assistance last August, and the landlord still hasn't heard anything. So right now, why we did not oppose Senate Bill 891 was because in the beginning, we were only going to be reimbursed for the 60-day safe harbor period, and not even the 90-day safe harbor period that some counties were implementing. So we agreed to extend it a little bit longer with the promise that we will be reimbursed for the entirety of the safe harbor period. While the landlord's waiting for a decision, that period will be fully covered. So they say, we're hoping there's enough money in that landlord guarantee fund to pay everyone. They put $10 million in there, hoping that's going to be enough. In addition, for the renters who get rent assistance, that's coming out of a different pot of money. But let's say the landlord is notified that their application is no longer pending, is what they say. It's canceled, it's denied for whatever reason. The landlord will be able to apply to be reimbursed for the safe harbor period only through this $10 million fund called the Landlord Guarantee Program. It's being administered by Home Forward. So if landlord's wondering about that program, they can just Google Landlord Guarantee Program, Home Forward, and you'll get to the Home Forward website. And I've never applied yet, but I've had some colleagues who have applied to be reimbursed for that safe harbor period. And they say, of all the programs that OHCS has created for us that have gone sideways, this one is actually easy to do. They finally worked out all the bugs.
Oh, good.
So now then you've got the issue though, where the tenant, the tenant still owes the money before and after that safe harbor period if they don't get rent assistance. Certainly if the renter's application is approved, the landlord gets their back rent, they get current rent, and they get 3 months moving forward typically. So while that application is pending, you can't do anything. That law lasts through September 30th. Beginning July 1, we're no longer going to have to include what's called the important notice about your rights to protection from eviction. So tenants have through June 30th to take advantage of this safe harbor period by applying for rent assistance. The OHCS program has opened and closed and opened and closed, and because they lack funding. They dedicated all the funding, then they found more money, and I don't know where it's at right now, whether it's open or closed. I think it may be closed at this time, but a landlord should be aware that that's not the only place a tenant can go for rent assistance. For example, here in Lane County still has money that they're distributing. So a tenant could apply, a Lane County tenant could apply there. We're seeing applications come from Catholic Community Services, maybe even some from shelter care. So not sure what the social service or aid organizations are in your area, but just because they can't access ORAP, which is the Oregon Emergency Rental Assistance Program, doesn't mean they're not going to be able to get assistance elsewhere. So doesn't just have to be that one program. You need to be aware of that. And another thing that's really driving me crazy is landlords who are not demanding written evidence from their tenants. So the safe harbor period, you're only going to get reimbursed from that if the tenant shows you written evidence. And when you apply, that's part of what you have to provide. It's not from the day the tenant applied for assistance that you're going to get reimbursed. It's only from the day they show you that written evidence.
Oh, that's a big deal.
And so a lot of landlords I've talked to are like, well, my tenant has said they applied for rent assistance. And I'm like, that's not good enough. Right? You've got to get that written evidence from them. You may have to serve them that 10-day notice to force them to give you that. Then if they do, the tenant is protected through the earlier of September 30th, the end of this period, the day you're notified that their application is no longer pending, the day you get possession of the property, either willingly from the tenant or forcibly in court. And that's your safe harbor period. Then the tenant owes you everything in front and behind. But if you have a tenant, like I said earlier, who has caused damage to the premises and refuses to pay you for that, the landlord could serve a what's called a for-cause termination notice, giving the tenant an additional couple of weeks to pay. And you can take that to court. You can go to court, and you don't have to include the important notice if it's for damage alone. But any other notice, whether it's a 10-day or a 13-day or a notice of termination with cause for other charges like late fees that remain unpaid, you must include the important notice about the tenant's rights to protection from eviction through June 30th. I'm also seeing a problem where some landlords are serving the old notice that only told the tenant that they had protection through February 28th. So it's really important you get the correct notice. There's one available on the Oregon Rental Housing Association website. It's available at the Oregon Law Center. There's a million places to get this. You've got to make sure that important notice tells them that through June 30th, they can apply and show their landlord written evidence. So that's, one thing I'm seeing. Another cautionary tale for landlords is when you get this notification, you need to check with the assisting agency to ensure that they have your correct information. I have been told by more than one landlord that they never checked, and it turned out that when, we're not sure whether the tenants accidentally or purposefully gave the wrong landlord information to the agency, but when they can't reach the landlord, they're giving the money directly to the tenant, who may or may not pass it on. Exactly.
Really?
So, yes, it's very important that landlords confirm that whatever agency is assisting them, that they have the landlord's correct information. And yeah, I heard of one landlord whose tenant got a $6,000 check and paid the landlord $2,000 of that.
That's terrible.
Yeah, it is. It's a very challenging time we're in, and it's so challenging to keep these rules straight. I tell you, if you're a landlord out there who's not a member of a local landlord association, you're making a big mistake. You either need to keep checking our website at Oregon Rental Housing so you can stay up on the latest, or if you are a member of an association, like, for example, the Southern Oregon Rental Owners Association, the ROA of Southwestern Oregon, which is based out of Coos Bay area, any of them will make sure that you're getting this information, and it's really important.
So I'm just flabbergasted that the reimbursement that a landlord is supposed to get the landlord who possibly was not getting paid by the tenant and they were still paying their mortgage could accidentally be given to the tenant, and the tenant can cash the money, and that could be the end of it. I just can't believe that that can even happen.
Well, it's supposed to be paid to the landlord. I'm not an attorney. I'm a lot of things, but I'm not that. And I don't know if that's, sort of fraud or a criminal act of some sort. It certainly seems, it's certainly not
It's certainly not right.
It's certainly not right.
Oh, those poor landlords. Good grief. Okay. So get your notices straight and make sure that the agencies involved in these tenant situations have the landlord's correct address. Is that the lesson?
Yes, your correct email address, your correct contact information. That's essential. These are kind of heartbreaking stories because, if the landlord doesn't know how to go about it, checking, then they're potentially going to be burned.
No, good grief. Well, we have to take a quick break here, Tia. We're talking to Tia Politi, Rental Housing Support Services, LLC. She's the current Oregon Housing president. She's also president of Lane County Renters Owner Association, and just a wealth of information. And I'm so happy to have you back, Tia. Always super educational. We'll be back after a quick message from our sponsors. We're brought to you today by John L. Scott, Ashland, Medford, Guy Giles, Mutual of Omaha Mortgage, and our local Rogue Valley Association of Realtors. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back, folks, to the Real Estate Show. Alice Lema, broker John L. Scott here, welcoming you back to the Real Estate Show. Tia Politi is our guest today. She comes on every so often and brings us up to speed on all things landlord tenant. Welcome back, Tia.
Thank you, Alice. I always enjoy your show. You're just a wonderful interviewer, and I'm excited to have this opportunity.
Well, I'm just so happy to have you back. So in the first segment, we were kind of getting caught up on the COVID and how that's all kind of unwinding. Before we finish that topic, though, there are outbreaks back east. It's spiking, our numbers are spiking in Oregon. I call it the COVID sandwich again. Are there any rumors if what's going to happen if we do have another major outbreak? Has anybody said?
I have not heard anything about that. I fingers crossed, I'd have to ask the magic 8-ball. I've completely lost all confidence in my ability to predict the future anymore since this last 2 years of horror. But they've got to have money. I think finally everybody realized we just can't, we can't allow the rental industry to collapse, right? Mm-hmm. We can't allow private landlords to go bankrupt because they still have a mortgage to pay and tenants aren't required to pay their rent. So I'm really hopeful that we're not going to see any more impacts on housing providers. But again, I've lost all confidence in my ability to predict the future. Well,
and the state's reaction left and right has caught all of us by surprise over and over again. So probably wasn't a fair question. Just wondered if the rumor mill was heating up yet. Let's talk about some of the more practical day-to-day issues with landlord tenants. We had some changes in the laws in the last year or so. Why don't we talk about that?
We did. Last year's short session really had to narrow their focus to COVID things. So it really prevented a lot of the wish list that the tenant advocates would like to have seen happen. We know they're gearing up for 2023. So I'd really like to, again, remind you all that how you vote is extremely important, especially your vote for governor and your vote for Senate. If we can flip that even by a couple of votes or get a more reasonable governor in place and potentially gain a better balance in the Senate, then it forces the other side to have to work with us and not just steamroll us. So I really can't emphasize strongly enough how important your vote is this year, especially for governor and for Senate. The Senate has always been our backstop for really outrageous law changes. And I really encourage y'all to get out and vote and try to bring some balance back to our legislature.
And that's really all we want. We just want fairness. It's just so one-sided right now. So yeah.
Exactly. So thank you for letting me say that. So we did have a couple of changes, one that came out of last year's long session and became effective in January 1 of this year. And that was related to screening. So it basically, that law, I think it was called Senate Bill 291, kind of aligned state law more closely with federal law in regards to screening for criminal history. So it's kind of made some more, it makes the landlord have to really look at criminal history, really look at what is called supplemental evidence that a tenant can submit to help overcome a negative screening outcome. And they ask you to look at various things like the age of the applicant at the time the crime occurred, you know, the nature of the crime. Like, does it, you know, we've always been under this sort of law that, hey, if the crime doesn't pose, you know, someone with criminal history, the crimes don't pose a present danger to you or other tenants or to the property, that you really need to overlook that. You know, like an example might be, you know, a wildlife violation, right? I mean, you know, I have a good friend who's a great hunter, and, you know, he just did a stupid thing one day. And he was driving down the road and he saw a deer out in the field, and gosh darn if it wasn't one of those mechanical deer. And Fish and Wildlife, you know, gave him a ticket. He has that criminal history now, and they confiscated his gun.
Wow.
You know, I mean, that's not something that's generally going to pose a problem to a landlord or a tenant. So, you know, certain things you've always been required to overlook. We're still allowed to deny for, you know, violent criminal history. We're allowed to deny sex offenders, crimes of violence, drug manufacturing, but not marijuana or medical marijuana. Now we're asked to look at criminal history with a lens that I believe most managers, most professional managers already do this, because the HUD memo has been out there since 2016. And it basically said, you know, someone with an event, a criminal event in their past who has no, you know, further violations within the last 6 or 7 years is no more likely to reoffend than someone with no criminal history at all. And so basically what I like to remind landlords is what happened matters. How long ago was it? How old was the person? What were maybe, you know, exonerating circumstances? My favorite example is a fellow I ran into years ago. And he had assault 4 on his record about 2.5 years prior. And that's concerning. Everything else about him checked out perfectly. And so anytime someone has criminal history, we ask them to provide an explanation. So he had a really good explanation. The fella came home from work one day to find his wife having sex with his best friend, and he beat the snot out of his best friend. Wow. And so, you know, I didn't consider the man a danger to society at large, just people who had sex with his wife. And I ran into him, right? So, you know, he checked out perfectly otherwise. He said, yep, I did it. He pled guilty. He paid his fines. You know, we all have our breaking point. And so, you know, that's important. It's important to look at the why. It's important to look at how long ago it was, whether they accept responsibility for whatever it was. I ran into one of my favorite success stories is a woman named Jennifer, who I taught through Renters Rehab, which is one of the volunteer things I do. And Jennifer had a meth possession history, like meth manufacturing, absolutely not, no. But she had meth possession. She had lost custody of both of her daughters. When she came to look to rent from the company I was working for, she had 1 year living in a clean and sober living environment. She had paid all her fines, totally complied with the terms of parole and probation, got glowing reference from the house mother at the you know, the drug and alcohol rehab home. So I rented to her, albeit with a higher deposit and a qualified co-signer, because she was a higher risk. You know, someone with criminal history does pose a higher risk potentially. And in that year she was with us, she regained custody of her daughters and had to move out and find a bigger place. So I'm still in touch with Jennifer to this day. And, you know, we all love those kinds of stories.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Right. But we did our due diligence. We got that higher deposit to mitigate the risk and, you know, kept close track of her. So one change is that criminal history. So you need to look at that. You need to take into account various things. Also, if the tenant is participating in a diversion program, a conditional discharge program for pending charges, normally if there's pending charges that we wouldn't normally rent to that have not been adjudicated at the time they apply, we can say no. But now if they're in this diversion program, you have to, you know, kind of take that away. So just a few changes there. Also, we did have a change in our lead-based paint renovation rules. So lead-based paint has always, you know, for the longest time, landlords could do their own work on a lead-based paint property, but that changed a while ago. Even landlords who work on their own pre-1978 built house have to be lead-based paint certified. So that's been the law for some time. Now, though, property managers and landlords can, what they call third parties, can be held liable if they hire someone who isn't properly certified, or liable if that person causes a problem. So it's so important to know, if you're getting your home painted and it's pre-1978 built, you trust me, you do not want to get fined by the EPA. I had that situation happen years ago with a property that I was managing the property next door, and I saw that it was this old historic home in Eugene, and literally somebody had pressure washed this home, spewed lead chips everywhere across their property, the neighboring property.
Oh,
so
no.
the EPA fines start at $6,000 just for not providing a form. That guy had to pay a lot of money, tens of thousands of dollars in fines. He had to remediate the lead contamination on all his own property and all the surrounding properties, and then in the end hire a lead-based paint certified painter to finish the job.
Start all over. Wow.
It is not worth messing around with this. Lead-based paint is harmful to children and other living things. You do not want lead contamination in your home, and you certainly don't want it ingested by your child. It permanently impacts their intellect, permanently. It is not fixable once they've gotten that poisoning. So really important that you know how to deal with hazardous materials and that you deal with them properly.
So I don't think most landlords know that. So do you have any idea if you're going to work on your own building and you're going to do your own lead-based paint remediation, what's the process to be?
Well, I'm not certified. I know a little bit about it. You must be certified. I was going to say you can get certified through a lot of different hazardous material companies are offering that training. I believe the Home Builders Association offers that training.
Got it.
It's a one-day class. It teaches you how to test for lead-based paint. It teaches you can't pressure wash lead-based paint. You have to cover the ground. You have to scrape it. If you have tenants in place, you must provide them with a pamphlet called Renovate Right. And so it's a public health issue, and it's really important that housing providers understand what their liabilities are. Ryan Barker from the Oregon Housing Authority is going to be presenting through the Treasure Valley Association. So if you're a member of SORA or any of these landlord groups, we're having him come speak at our July meeting, our general meeting. You'll get notifications of these types of trainings. And it's so important that if you're going to run a business, any business, you have to stay up on the changing law. And landlording is no different. You blow it, you mess up one thing. I've got one of my own members right now is facing a lawsuit for more than $13,000 for one mistake. And what does they say? If you think education is expensive, try ignorance, right?
Right.
And nowhere is that more true than in the world of rental property. You're providing a unit to someone, and it has to be safe, and it has to be free of, if you're going to be disturbing hazardous materials, you have to do it right, or face very painful consequences.
Well, and in the lead-based paint, I just think people underestimate the danger. And they also underestimate doing things like power washing. You think you're just, getting the cobwebs off your place, and you have no idea what is being put into the soil, the air, your neighbors, the animals, the neighbor's garden. Yeah, that is a super big deal and really kind of scary.
It is. And there's, a lot of risk out there for housing providers. And one of the things I recommend that you all consider, because this fella, if he had it, he would have been covered likely for his mistake, is get yourself a personal liability umbrella. My husband and I have a $2 million personal liability umbrella, and that'll cover us in a lawsuit up to the maximum amounts of our coverage. And it costs us like $375 a year. And it's a tax deductible business expense. You just can't afford to not protect yourself with proper insurance. And then knowing the rules, knowing the laws. One of the best benefits of belonging to an association is you have access to that helpline, that educated person who can help answer questions, not every question, because we're not attorneys, but help guide you. You just got to know what you're doing. And we also had another change this year related to air conditioning. So I don't know if we have time to talk about that in this segment, or if you want me to hang on with that.
We might have to wait for the next one because we have another break, and it's always so hard to stop because you are just such a wealth of information. So can you repeat the class that's being done on the lead-based paint in like the 10 seconds we have left?
I would just Google Oregon Health Authority, but the class is through the Treasure Valley Rental Association. You can go onto the Oregon Rental Housing Association website and see that class and sign up even if you're not a member.
Okay, great, great. We're talking to Tia Politi. She's the president of the Oregon Housing Association, also Lane County Renter Owner Association president, and she owns Rental Housing Support Services. We'll be right back after a quick word from these sponsors. Well, welcome back again to the Real Estate Show, folks. Alice Lema here, broker John L. Scott, talking to Tia Politi, one of my favorite people, the walking, talking encyclopedia of all things landlord tenant. I hope it's okay to call you that. I just kind of named you accidentally one day.
I actually think that's a great title. I have an ability to memorize things. And
yeah, I hope it wasn't annoying. But, you know, I wanted to ask a question. In the last segment, we were talking about the criminal background. I can't tell you how many people come to me and they're tenants right now, and they're worried about applying to another tenant situation because they had an arrest between where they are and where they're going. And they're worried that they're going to be denied housing. There's still that idea that you can be denied housing.
You can, but now under this new bill that I partially talked about, if, you know, what a tenant needs to do is they need to go belly up, right? They need to say, here's what I did, here's what happened, here's why I'm not a danger to you. They need to admit what they did. When I'm teaching renters rehab, I tell them, don't lie to me, because if you find out that you lied, then that's an automatic denial. If you go belly up, tell me what happened, why it happened. We also ask you to provide what is called supplemental evidence to help overcome that. So have you completed programs? Did you comply with the terms of parole and probation, if any? Did you pay your debt to society, in effect? And what can you show me that demonstrates a changed life? And so I think that's really important. And then if now what the new law is for landlords is if a tenant has provided you with that supplemental evidence to help overcome a negative screening outcome and you deny them anyway, now you have to explain why that supplemental evidence did not overcome your decision to deny their application. So that's going to be a big challenge for housing providers now. And even if you use a screening company, they're not going to be able to help you with that part. You, the landlord, you, the owner of the property, or your manager has got to provide that information. And I think that's where we're probably likely to see some issues for housing providers coming up.
Wow, that's interesting.
It really is. And so, you know, what happened? Why did it happen? I mean, honestly, I've run into sex offenders, one in particular, and it's a really interesting kind of cautionary tale and a kind of a sad tale as well. Kelly, fellow I ran into, he and his wife were, you know, absolutely great renters, but Kelly was a registered sex offender. But the story, the why, kind of demonstrates why it's important to hear the story. So Kelly made a poor choice back in the 80s. And when you got to go, you got to go. And he went and urinated in public. And somebody saw his wiener and they called the police, and he was cited for misdemeanor exposure of his genitals. Then he made another poor choice about 10 years later and was witnessed by a Walmart parking lot camera pleasuring himself in his vehicle.
Oh no.
Because, yeah, I mean, it's not a happy story, but you know, because of the prior misdemeanor crime of exposure, he is now a felon, and the Oregon State Police reclassified sex offenders in the state, and now poor Kelly is classified as a high-risk predatory sex offender, and the man has never laid a hand on anyone but himself. He was not a predator. He did not forcibly rape anyone. And so I keep asking Fair Housing Council, like, when are you going to start separating out statutory sex crimes from predatory sex crimes?
Yeah.
Hey, when I was 17, my boyfriend was 27, right? he committed a statutory sex crime with me, I'll admit it. And so, you know, but that's very different than forcible.
Yeah.
You know, and I think most people understand that, right? Most of us understand that there's a big difference between a predator who assaults someone than there is somebody who's convicted of something, you know, statutory. So we'll see how that goes. But again, the bottom line I want you to understand is the why matters. And it's important to hear the story. It's important to see, you know, he had nothing else in his history. He was a great renter. They had plenty, you know, everything was great. And so I chose to take a chance and rent to them, and it was a great experience. I've rented to people with drugs in their past, et cetera. And if they can show me their changed life, it is such a rewarding feeling to help someone rebuild their life, rebuild their history. And so, yeah, I just encourage housing providers out there. It is now the law. You must consider any sort of exculpatory or supplemental evidence that will help overcome that. The why matters, the what happened matters, how old they were, how long ago it was, all of those things should play into your decision.
And second chances are just great when especially if there's a good reason to feel secure on both sides. So, in a lot of cases, these laws are good.
They are, because it's just so easy to say no criminal history and just not have to think about that.
Yeah.
When I teach this to and I taught it yesterday, and we'll teach it again. When I tell people, I bet every one of you in this room has done something when you were young that you regret and you wish nobody else knew about, right? Well, I was fortunate enough. I did drugs, never got caught. I've driven intoxicated, never got caught. And so, you know what I mean? We've all done stuff. And when I see that, and I'm in person with people, I can see them, rolling their eyes and smirking. And, we all have that situation, I think. I think we've all done things we regret. So, that's important to take into consideration.
Yeah. And again, second chances are really cool. So kind of happy.
As long as they're educated, second chance.
Educated, true. That's true.
Your due diligence.
So we only have a couple of minutes left, Tia. So there was a new something that came out in the Southern Oregon Rental Association, SORA is what we call it down here, newsletter. And it had to do with heating and cooling. Can you talk to us about the new requirements for landlords?
Sure. You remember last year's heat wave in June, it was just gobsmacked us all. Senate Bill 1536 has now made it a requirement that landlords have to allow what are called portable cooling devices in their units. It can't damage the building. It can't pose a hazard to health and safety. It can't block the only means of egress from a particular room. So you can require, a lot of housing providers don't like the window ACs because they can damage the building.
Yeah.
They can also create leaks and rot, around the window frame. But we have these cool stand-up portable ones, right, that vent out the window. And so now we're required to allow it. And if you want to limit how the tenant can do it and make sure that they are, doing it in a safe manner, you're going to have to send out a form to them, letting them know what they can and cannot do. The landlord also has the opportunity to require that they either install it or approve the installation of it. It also is going to extend a notice of termination with cause. So I call that notice a 3014. It's a 30-day notice of termination with a 14-day right to cure. So let's say the tenant, after having been sent this one pager saying you can't damage the building, right? And they do anyway. You serve them a notice of termination with cause to remove it. That gives a 14-day cure period. There's this special provision in this law that says for every day that the heat index is above a certain amount as measured by the National Weather Service, and there's a website they can go to, that they'll have to extend the cure period through the end of that extraordinary heat event. So, it's designed to help keep people from dying. Right? We lost so many people. This was absolutely unprecedented in Oregon. And the biggest victims were elderly people.
Yep. The most vulnerable of our
That's correct.
Of our folks. So Tia Politi, I'm sorry we have to wrap it up. I hope you'll come back and visit us again.
Absolutely.
Just wonderful as always. This broadcast will be repeated again tomorrow, Sunday at 6 o'clock, Radio 880 KCMX. I want to say thanks again to John L. Scott, Ashland, Medford, Guy Giles, Mutual of Omaha Mortgage, and ARVAR, which is our local Rogue Valley Association of Realtors. Have a beautiful weekend. Thanks again, Tia.
Thanks.